Mr. Harry Elmer Fox. Mr. Fox was born December 27, 1974 in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, and grew up outside the city in the small town of Myerstown. His mother is Linda Fox Keith, a seamstress and woodworker. His father, now deceased, was Ronald Fox, who worked as a sanitation engineer and mechanic. As a child, his uncle had inspired him to join the military because he was a veteran himself. In April of 1992, Mr. Fox enlisted into the Army. Do you have any other family members that were or are in the service?
I had an uncle that was in the military in the Air National Guard. He reached the rank of E9, Senior Enlisted Advisor for the Pennsylvania Air National Guard. And my grandfather was also in the Army and Navy.
Mr. Fox went through training in the National Guard located in Pennsylvania. He was soon stationed to many bases throughout the United States, such as Fort Bragg in North Carolina, Fort Bliss in Texas, Fort Lewis in Washington, and currently Fort Jackson, North Carolina. Mr. Fox recalls the first day of basic training to be swelteringly hot with plenty of sergeants yelling at him, a day he'll never forget. His first few days were found to be the hardest amidst all the chaos, including the gas chambers, but they were definitely unforgettable to him.
I remember the gas chamber. That was terrifying. We had to put our protective mask on, walk in to this chamber where they had this chemical called CS gas. Then we just make sure it felt good. It felt like a real bad sunburn, I would tell you that much. And then we took our mask off and had to recite our name and social security number before we could leave the gas chamber.
Mr. Fox learned the ins and outs of being a generator mechanic while in MOS, Military Occupational Specialty Training. He acquired the skills to fix most machinery, speak the jargon of fellow soldiers, and march everywhere. He attended the airborne school, completing 19 successful jumps out of a plane. Mr. Fox trained for other jobs like convoy commander and drill sergeant throughout his years of duty.
It took quite some time for Mr. Fox to adjust to military life, just as any other recruit would. He remembered being in terrible shape at this period of time in the service. The barracks where he slept and lived in were usually crowded, busy, and noisy, which allowed him to easily become ill. Military food, or chow as they called it, was not the most appealing, but he always had to eat quickly, about 10 minutes before leaving. He did not have a whole lot of time to enjoy it, but it contained about his day's worth of calories and nutrition.
That was tough. My, we call battle buddies, the person to our left and right, helped get me through it, the physical. The food, what we call chow, never enough, and it really wasn't that good. Well, I really didn't have time to taste it. We had just minutes to eat. We had to get down, sit down, shove it down our throat, and leave. I mean, I believe it was 10 minutes we were allowed to eat. 10 minutes to eat. At least that's what I give my soul, 10 minutes, and that's it. So I couldn't imagine it was any worse.
Mr. Fox finally departed for Iraq in February 2003 and returned in June later that year. His locations of foreign missions included Germany, Bosnia, Hungary, Korea, and Egypt. Mr. Fox was also a participant in Operation Iraqi Freedom and the invasion of Iraq. In the U.S., he often visited the stations mentioned previously for additional training. He was promoted to be a drill sergeant at Fort Lewis, Washington, one of his favorite places. In most of these places, Mr. Fox served as a generator mechanic, keeping the power going for the missions, and if it broke, he fixed it. As a convoy commander, he was in charge of 5 or 6 vehicles and people of all ranks. Route Irish, one of the most dangerous roads at the time, was a place well traveled for him. Mr. Fox's missions took him several cultural places with unforgettable experiences.
Mr. Fox never forgot the actions he witnessed on duty. In 2009, he almost saw a female in the gunner position almost get severed in half. She was about 6 inches away from losing her life, but she was all right for the most part. Also, a Navy medic had almost been amputated by the wrath of war. Luckily, these soldiers got to survive in one piece. One New Year's Eve of 2009, into 2010, artillery shells were fired at Mr. Fox's bunkers, which were, fortunately, the only surprise attack he experienced. However, he had been put into a couple tough situations, one of them involving a woman and her child. At the moment, a woman and her daughter were crossing into his line of sight as a soldier of defense, and he was afraid he would have to pull a gun on the two if they did not keep moving. Mr. Fox is very grateful that he didn't have to do what he had to do because he came possibly a fraction of an inch to firing a shot at someone.
We stopped alongside the road, and she was in my line of sight and taking up the defensive. Like, I was praying that nothing would happen. That way I didn't have to do what I had to do. That was the one thing that still haunts me a little bit to this day, that I came just a fraction of an inch, a split second from killing somebody. But I'm grateful I never ever had a fire shot in anger. Never. And I knock on wood for that one. That way I don't have to deal with that. That would have been a horrible thing to say I'd done. I wouldn't really be talking about it.
Jumping out of a plane was another tough situation for him because of how scary it was for him, and he broke his leg doing this in January 2002 during airborne training. It took him about 10 months to recover from it.
As for the feelings Mr. Fox had towards combat, casualties, and destruction, he had learned to get past it. He came across casualties every so often, so death was something expected in the military. Destruction became something he was used to in his daily life. Mr. Fox says how he overcame all these by putting it to the back of his mind and forgetting about it. This is something he continues to teach future recruits so they can perform their job without getting distracted emotionally. Combat was frightening to him for the most part, but it was also thrilling in a way. Also, being faced with the possibility that he may not come home afterwards was stressful. Mr. Fox says that he went over the wire out of safety 500 times and he was scared 500 times. In the end, he looked at it as if he survived each and every time. Positivity is what drove Mr. Fox each time. Knowing that he had a wife and a family to go home to, along with his future ahead of him, kept him going.
Mr. Fox describes himself as a busy man while still keeping in contact with friends and family. At first, he kept in contact the old-fashioned way by writing letters. Around the last time he was deployed, he used Yahoo Instant Messenger and Facebook. There was internet access, so he used video chat to talk to his wife daily. His days are kept busy. He may wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and may not finish work until 8 o'clock at night. In his free time, Mr. Fox enjoys fishing, hiking, and golfing.
The job of a drill sergeant is what Mr. Fox enjoys the most in the military. He was once a new recruit himself and now gets the opportunity to train those fresh in the Army. It is one of the most rewarding things he has ever done in his career. Mr. Fox explains how he is often yelling at future soldiers, but he also takes care of those who are having personal problems themselves if they are not functioning well, such as a death in the family or a spouse leaving them. Mr. Fox says that he will always remember the drill sergeant who trained him, and the new recruits he has trained will always remember him.
Mr. Fox last served in the National Guard in 1998. He had not endured a whole lot of training, but he had a lot of work. He cannot recall most of what his days were like in the National Guard.
When the Iraq War was slowly coming to an end, Mr. Fox was still there himself. However, he was in Fort Jackson training recruits as a drill sergeant when President Bush started pulling soldiers out. The final end of the Iraq War took place earlier this year, but Mr. Fox was still safe in performing his duty as a drill sergeant.
Coming home for the first time in the war was a very emotional experience for Mr. Fox. Many of his family were just happy to see him alive and well. He was overwhelmed to see his friends and family again, although it was a joyous time. Of course, it took time adjusting to life as a normal citizen again, and it was tough at first. For example, he wasn't used to driving the speed limit and getting a decent amount of sleep. Mr. Fox is grateful that he has a loving and understanding wife to get him through rough times like these. Leaving and going back to Iraq was heartbreaking for both him and his family.
I will never forget the look on her face when I left. The cheers, because you want one more second, one more minute. You want that. Because in the back of your mind, you know that could be it. You may never see them again this side of heaven. You may never see it. It was heartbreaking.
Being a part of our country's defense system is a huge part of Mr. Fox's life. In other words, he fights over there so that future generations hopefully won't have to. He sacrifices a normal American lifestyle and puts his life on the line daily. And he does this so we don't have to see it for our own eyes. Moreover, Mr. Fox's decisions and actions have awarded him several commendations. For example, he had received a Bronze Star on deployment for leading his squad through several hundred missions while keeping all of them alive and well. Another example of his rewards is the friends he had made. He still keeps in contact with other veterans to this day. Finally, another reward Mr. Fox had earned was the fact that he had survived so many times and brought other members out of the danger zone. His medals are nothing compared to what joy this reward gives him. Mr. Fox is a soldier that has most definitely earned his awards.
Mr. Harry Elmer Fox is one of the many veterans of the Iraq War, with an interesting story to tell. Ever since he set foot in camp for training, Mr. Fox has never given up. He has served several jobs in the military, including a generator mechanic, convoy commander, and most importantly, a drill sergeant. The stories and experiences in his career in the military do not compare to those of a normal citizen's life. Mr. Fox puts his heart and soul into what he does, and he comes back with an even greater reward, one of them being alive and well to see his family and friends once again.
God, from where I was 20 years ago to where I am now, I'm more physically fit. I got a great wife. Put food on the table. I got to see some very interesting stuff. Got to see some far off places. It just changed me in general, maybe better as a person.
Rebecca Seaman and I, Taylor Gentry, just like to take time to say thank you to Mr. Harry Elmer Fox for his wonderful cooperation, attitude, and service in our country's military.